Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be looking at Game 10 from the 2014 World Chess Championship between the reigning champion Magnus Carlsen and Vishy Anand, the challenger. Now, up until this point, Magnus Carlsen is up one game. We have 3 games remaining, games 10, 11, and 12. Vishy Anand gets to play white 2 more times, so in Game 10, the game we're going to be going over today, and Game 12, so he gets to end on white, but he definitely needs a victory, either in this one or the last one. It's probably too crazy to expect him to get a victory when he plays black against Magnus Carlsen in Game 11, so this match today is extremely important for him. He needs to come out very aggressive, try some crazy moves to catch Magnus Carlsen off guard like he did in the 3rd game, and so that's what we're going to be looking at today. So again, Vishy Anand playing the white pieces, Magnus Carlsen playing the black pieces. So Vishy Anand, as you can imagine, started with pawn to d4 as he has this entire tournament. Knight to f6, we've kind of seen this. Pawn to c4. Magnus Carlsen throwing us for a little loop, plays pawn here to g6. Up until this point, he would kind of been sticking with that pawn here to e6, and then either playing pawn here to b6 for the Queen's Indian, or just coming down for the Queen's Gambit's decline line with pawn here to d5. So changing it up quite a bit with pawn here to g6, and now knight to c3. Don't have to worry about that Nimzo Indian defense after pawn to e6. Then pawn here to d5. Magnus Carlsen going into the Grunfeld defense, so a very nice solid defense. Again, Magnus Carlsen, all he really needs to do is draw. He's up a game with only 3 games to go in the series, so he's not trying to do anything. He's looking for the most solid defense that he can possibly find. Vishy Anand, on the other hand, again, needs to be pretty aggressive. Knight here to f3. Bishop to g7, Fian cutting this bishop, trying to control this long dark square diagonal. And then Vishy Anand can go many different ways. He decides to go for the Russian system, which is pretty interesting because if you kind of look at Magnus Carlsen's games from his entire career, he's really only played against the Russian system twice, and that was almost 10 years ago. So although he hasn't played against it, he's very familiar with it. He does play the Grunfeld quite a bit, but it will be interesting to see how both sides have prepared for this. Obviously, Vishy Anand playing this, this is his go-to. He thinks he has a slight advantage in this, so it'll be interesting to see how Magnus Carlsen will defend against queen to b3. One thing this does right away is it pretty much forces black to take here on c4. All the pressure building up with the queen, the pawn, the knight here, all on the square on d5. Black pretty much needs to go ahead and take here on c4. White's going to recapture here on c4. And this does a few things. One, it opens up a semi-open file for this rook to come here to c1 at any given time. White definitely has control of the center, which again, if you're playing for black as a hyper-modern defense, you're willing to give up that control of the center so that you can try to counterattack with your minor pieces, and then only later will you start to push forward with your pawns. But white, although he is very aggressive, usually his queen can get chased around if he tries to stay too much in the center of the board. So he has a very active position, but definitely needs to make sure that he doesn't get his queen out too far because he doesn't want to give up his powerful pieces. So far, Magnus Carlsen, he learned from Game 3 where Vishy Anand kind of ran over him with his queen. If he can trade off queens, he knows he can get down to a very drawish endgame very, very quickly. So Vishy Anand is trying to avoid that. We see castle on the king side, pawn here to e4, and then Magnus Carlsen now has a few different options. As far as the Russian system, there's 3 main ways you can approach this. One is pawn to a6. They call this the Hungarian variation. Another one is to get the light square bishop out involved. So bishop to g4 is very popular. And then later you can start to push forward with pawn here to e6, but only after you get this light square bishop involved into the game. And the last one is knight to a6. And this is the Prince variation, very popular with Kasparov when he played Karpov in the World Championships many years ago. And you know, it's probably no surprise Kasparov and Magnus Carlsen studied this game chess together many, many times. They're very close friends. So Magnus Carlsen decided to play this knight to a6, which opens up the door for black to push forward with pawn here to c5 later on. Again, he's probably studied this many times with Kasparov. Bishop here to e2, getting ready to castle on the king side, and then pawn pushing forward to c5 as we talked about. Now the pawn's going to push up to d5, wants to stay as active as possible, doesn't want to go ahead and exchange right off the board, and then pawn here to e6. Getting ready to exchange, we now see castle on the king side, and then pawn taking here on d5. So Again, hypermodern defense, trying to control, getting your minor pieces, and then only then counterattacking in the center of the board. That's exactly what Magnus Carlsen's trying to do here. So pawn here to d5, going to be an important pawn the rest of the way. White's going to look to get his rooks behind this, start to push forward. If he can even push this to the 7th rank and maybe put pressure on his opponent to get a pass pawn, that's going to be very, very dangerous for Magnus Carlsen. So he has to keep an eye on that. For right now, he also has to keep an eye on his pawn here on c5. He doesn't want to have to tie up his knight here on a6 to hold control of this. You never want your knights on the edge. You want them in the center of the board to control more of the board. So he's going to be looking for an alternative to control the square here on c5. We see the rook over here to e8, trying to just control these open files. That's always where you want your rooks to go. And then bishop here to g5, pinning this knight down to the queen. Carlsen now plays pawn to h6, forcing this bishop to come back. Bishop here to e3, still a very active square for this bishop, controlling the center, and again attacking that small weakness for black with his pawn over here on c5. Now this bishop's going to come down here to f5, again just trying to complete development, getting all the minor pieces to control the center of the board, kind of what both sides are looking to do here. Rook over here to d1, trying to centralize this rook as well. You always want it to behind your pawn so you can kind of push those pawns forward. That's going to be very good. And then a novelty here. Up until this point, this variation has been seen before, but usually black would continue with queen to b6. And then from here, you may see rook here to d2, controlling this pawn here on b2. But we see our first novelty. So the Russian system in the Grunfeld defense, you don't see it all the time. And so we're starting to see a few different moves, which is always exciting. And Magnus Carlsen plays knight to e4. So a little bit more aggressive than even the queen to b6 is kind of they play out. But knight to e4, it's tough to say if Vishy Anand was prepared for it. He did play pretty quickly, but Magnus Carlsen, you could definitely tell, although he doesn't play against the Russian system, he was very confident in his moves, and he was ready for this knight to e4 move. We now see Vishy Anand take here on e4. We now see the bishop take. White now does have a double bishop pair, which is going to be always good. This queen's going to come back here to c1. Very good move, I think, from Vishy Anand. It does a lot of things. One, it's a discovered attack with this bishop here on a6. If Vishy Anand could take this knight, and then Magnus Carlsen's forced to retake with his pawn here. Double pawns on the A file or even the H file are just terrible. You can't do much at all. It's almost just having one pawn. So that's going to be very good. Also putting a lot of pressure on his opponent to play bishop to h6, since he does have his queen behind here. So it's very difficult for Magnus Carlsen to defend well. I think queen to f6, which he played, is probably the best. It not only defends the square here on a6, but if his opponent does play h6, he can actually force his opponent to trade off queens. And that's what happens in the game. Vishy Anand takes here on h6, and then the queen comes down here to b2, pretty much forcing his opponent's hand to go ahead and exchange. So we do see an exchange. Now the bishop come back here to b2. And as we discussed just a few minutes ago, that's what Magnus Carlsen wants to do. He's trying to exchange off all the material. If they could draw right now, Magnus Carlsen would immediately do that. He doesn't want to try to do anything too crazy. Definitely doesn't want his opponent to have an active queen. That's the only game that he's lost in this entire series, is game number 3, when Vishy Anand kind of ran rapid with his queen. So he is ecstatic at this point to go ahead and go down in material. And so that's pretty much what he's going to be looking to do the rest of the game. Now we see knight here to g5, and Magnus Carlsen took a long time, 20 plus minutes after this move. He said after the press conference he wasn't expecting this move. He thought it was a very active move from Vishy Anand. And so he definitely didn't want to mess up, because he said if he made any wrong moves in the next 4 to 5 moves, it was going to be devastating for him. I think he did end up with the best move, and he played bishop here to d4. And this does a lot of things. One, it centralizes your bishop, which is always what you want to do. It puts it on a nice outpost, so it's defended by this pawn here on c5. His opponent has a dark square here on h6. It's going to be very difficult to attack this. You don't want to exchange off with your rook just because you'll go down material. But another thing it does, it blocks off protection from this rook here on d1 on this pawn. So now he can start to attack. He can get his knight involved into the game, since it now has another defender with this bishop here on d4. This knight can get involved. This bishop here on e4 can also attack this pawn. Also, the rook can swing over here to d8 and start to attack this pawn here as well. So, Magnus Carlsen, fantastic find. You know, if we kind of look at it, we say, oh yeah, you know, it's pretty easy. Just centralize your bishop and find an outpost. But he did have many different options, but I definitely think he found the best one here. Anand decided to go ahead and take this bishop here on e4, recognizing that it's just putting a lot of pressure on this pawn, and since he no longer has the protection from his rook, he just didn't want to have to deal with it. He could have played bishop here to c4. It seems a little bit too passive just to try to hold on to this pawn and just pretty much give up any attacking prowess that this bishop here has. Could have also maybe even tried bishop to b5, attacking this rook, but that's just kind of an in-between move. After the rook moves, all of a sudden his pawn's going to be under attack again, so decided he didn't want to have to deal with that, just plays knight taking here on e4. Then the rook's going to swing down here to e4 take, and then bishop to f3. Now the good thing is, Magnus Carlsen no longer has a bishop pair, so as long as Anand can keep this board open, he does have the bishop pair. That's going to be good in an open game. Bishops definitely do better in an open game because they have more squares that they can control over the board, so Anand definitely has that going for him. Now the rook's going to swing up back here to e7, and then the pawn pushes forward here to d6. Anand, he needs to open up this d file. That's very important for him right now. This bishop on d4 is just kind of annoying for him, but he does want to kind of open this up and then push forward, and if he can get it further, it could be very, very detrimental for Magnus Carlsen. Now the rook over here to d7, all this is doing is just kind of slowing that down. It's going to be very difficult for Anand to push past that. He could always bring his bishop here to g4, but then just rook back here to d8. There's no way to really stop both of those as well. Knight here to b4, more of an active square from here. And then if we look at it, we see the rook up here to d2, defending this square here on a2. Rook over here to e8, trying to control this long foul right here. Rook over here to c1. Again, just both sides trying to find any small advantage that they can. This rook starting to attack this pawn here on c5. And then pawn here, or excuse me, rook here to e6, attacking this pawn, and then pawn to push forward over here on h4, trying to attack on the king side. It's going to be very, very difficult for Anand to actually find an opening right here, but that's kind of what he's going for. Now, Magnus Carlsen decides now is the time to go ahead and start exchanging material off the board, and he would only do this bishop here to e5, opening up this d file if he thought he could start to exchange material, but that's exactly, you know, what happened. It's very difficult for Anand to do anything else besides exchange. So after we see this exchange right here, now a pretty interesting move in the match for Anand. He decided to go ahead and take with his bishop here on b7. If you look at it, you may say, okay, he's exchanging his bishop to this pawn on b7, and then the rook's just going to take it. Why would he do that? He's going to go down in material. And he does, but he gets that back. Unfortunately, to get it back, he has to exchange off a lot of material and go to a drawish endgame. He could have always tried for something else. As I kind of analyze it, you know, there's not a ton of great moves, but I do like pawn here to a3. It almost forces the knight to come back here to c6. And then if you see an exchange, you do get to an endgame, but all of a sudden you see double pawns here on the c file. So I think a slight advantage to white in this scenario, but it is going to be very, very difficult to actually take that and to convert it into a win. But Anand decided to play bishop taking here on b7, and the rook take it, as you can imagine. But then the pawn pushing forward here to d7, so threatening the queen up here on d8. Magnus Carlsen only has one move, that's knight here to c6, and then after the promotion, we do see an exchange right here. But this is a drawn-in game. There's no real way for either side to do too much. They're equal in material, and again, neither player in a million years could potentially lose this. And so after just two more moves, both players decide to go ahead and draw, get ready for the day off tomorrow. So again, if you're a Magnus Carlsen fan, you've got to feel pretty good about this. Another draw. You only have two more games to dodge. If you can draw both of those, you're going to be the champion once again, and you're going to be champion for 2 more years since we don't have a world championship next year. If you're in the Anand camp, you've got to be a little disappointed that you couldn't find any advantage to take advantage of and come out with a win. You do have one more game with whites going until the 12th game, which could be super epic if Vishy Anand could find a win in that case. If Magnus Carlsen wins the next game, though, it is all over. So that's going to be exciting. But hopefully you guys enjoyed. I definitely thought there was more fireworks in this one than the last one, which only was like 20 moves, and it didn't look like anyone wanted to play. Magnus Carlsen just defended extremely well, showed why he is the chess champion. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.